Recently, a tournament known as the Annihilator Cup was conducted amongst various popular streamers. In this tournament, the streamers were tasked with competing against and alongside one another for 5 separate games. After the 5 games, the winner would receive a cash prize. Now, because I'm talking about this tournament, you've probably already come to the conclusion that Dead by Daylight was one of the 5 games featured in the tournament. If you came to this conclusion, well done. Gold star and a cookie for you. Now, I am not super interested in covering the actual games that occurred between these streamers. If that's something you'd be interested in seeing, I highly recommend Choi's video on the tournament, which I'll link in the description below. It's really well done, and I think you're going to enjoy it if you haven't already seen it. No, rather than talk about the actual tournament, I want to address the revelations I came to after watching some of the footage from it. This tournament was a massive opportunity for Behavior to put their product in front of thousands, if not tens or hundreds of thousands, of fresh eyes, and it's safe to say that it was a dropped ball in a pretty big way. I can't say I'm overly familiar with any of the streamers featured in the tournament, but I recognize some of the names just off of name value alone, and just 5 minutes of digging revealed that we were dealing with some pretty heavy hitters. Content creators like Mizkif, Lyric, Shroud, and Tim the Tatman are juggernauts in the streaming community, and they held the power to greatly sway public opinion in Behavior's favor. Had they all loved the game, or had most of them loved the game, this tournament would have been a massive, massive shot in the arm for DBD's lagging player count. But therein lies the issue. The streamers didn't love the game. In fact, most of them seemed to dislike or actively hate the game. Some of their complaints were understandable but ultimately harmless. Of course, a group of people unfamiliar with Dead by Daylight didn't know how to play Hillbilly or Spirit well. Of course, they weren't prepared to loop optimally or slam gens as efficiently as possible. Of course, they played like baby survivors and killers, because that's what they were. With a few exceptions, the majority of the field were either generally unfamiliar with or completely foreign to Dead by Daylight. And unlike picking up one FPS game after playing another, there's really no other game out there that can prepare you for DBD, not even games like Friday the 13th or Predator Hunting Grounds. All of that to say, I don't blame Behavior for the fact that most of the streamers didn't do their homework and were promptly embarrassed. They knew ahead of time that DBD was on the docket and they chose not to prepare. That's on them. What I do blame Behavior for are the negative aspects of the tournament and game that they're absolutely responsible for. Numerous streamers expressed frustration with the perk system, specifically how they had to search through 7 pages of perks to find the ones they wanted. A comment was made asking why there's not a search ability, and you know what? I wonder that too. Why isn't there something as simple as a search mechanic in Dead by Daylight after 6 years of being on the market? Would it really be that difficult to program such a feature in? The answer, obviously, is that no. It would not be difficult to add a search feature to the perk screen. So, why hasn't it been done? Beats me. Maybe it's because Behavior thinks the players are always wrong. Maybe it's because they tend to treat all criticism as destructive rather than constructive. So the simple recommendation of a search bar is viewed as an attack. Maybe it's because it would take actual work, however little, to implement such a design. Or maybe, if I'm being as cynical as possible, it's because they can't figure out how to monetize a search bar. The search bar was, as you might expect, far from the only issue. Perks in general proved problematic as the tournament rules stated that no players could use duplicate perks. Now, while this has become fairly commonplace in most DBD tournaments, the need for such a rule speaks poorly of Behavior's ability to balance the game's perks at the highest level. This rule is only in place because tournament organizers know that not having this rule in place would mean that every survivor chooses from not a pool of 104 perks, but really from a pool of about 12 perks, and that's being generous. If left unchecked, tournament survivor squads would nearly universally boil down to every player using Dead Hard, Borrowed Time, and 2 other highly meta perks. The reason for this is often misunderstood, too, as players have a bad habit of mislabeling the vast majority of perks as, quote, weak. In reality, most survivor perks are only weak in relation to the very strongest perks. In a vacuum, there's actually real value to be had with many of DBD's lesser used perks. The issue is that the perks at the top are so strong that not bringing them is nearly the same as throwing. If you're not loading up on second chance perks, you're not trying. And on that note, let's talk about trying. Dead by Daylight has got to be the only competitive or semi-competitive game in history where trying is viewed as breaking some unspoken rule. And don't get me wrong, I know that other games have silly unspoken rules as well, but it's definitely worse with DBD. Sure, using whichever hero comp best fits the current meta in Overwatch might get you labeled as a tryhard, and yeah, using pre-nerf Blackbeard in Siege was a literal sin. But only in DBD is the actual concept of going for the win considered toxic. Don't believe me? Then if what I said is wrong, why is it such a faux pas to tunnel a survivor out of the game early? Why is it frowned upon to bring brand new parts or exclusively meta perks? Because you can say what you will, but tunneling the first survivor out of the game as early and efficiently as possible is the best way to ensure victory from the killer side. Using overpowered perks and add-ons is the best way to do the same as a survivor. Just to be clear, I don't want to see more tunneling or to receive an even more steady serving of Dead Hard. I'm only stating that we as a community know what the most effective paths to victory are, and still we scold those who use them. And while I appreciate healthy disagreement, I'd ask those of you who may be tempted to comment something along the lines of, well, I don't mind camping, tunneling, using OP perks, etc. Please understand that I'm aware that there are some people who don't mind these things, but there is still an undeniable culture of criticism that exists around these tactics. Exceptions may well exist, and they do, but they're just that, exceptions, not the rule. This issue of quote-unquote improper strategy popped up very notably during the tournament when Mizkif was playing killer and he was informed that he would be disqualified if he continued to camp. In a moment of rage, he asked, "What am I supposed to do if I can't camp? It makes no sense. I can't camp him, so I can't be near him, so I have to pretend to walk away." He then likened it to role-playing, as if he had to pretend he didn't care about people coming to make the save. This is a prime example of a player being penalized because of the made-up rules that have been deemed necessary to keep DBD going. And now, all of this time into the video, I reach my main point, that the Annihilator Cup did not create problems for DBD. It merely highlighted them for a massive audience of new viewers. During an event with such high-profile streamers, Dead by Daylight was exposed as a game with poor menu design, grossly imbalanced perks, and the need for self-disciplined rules to keep the game running smoothly. What's more, the evidence was laid bare that behavior and Dead by Daylight are facing a massive conundrum. Fixing some of the game's core issues would not be all that hard. Quality of life changes can be hammered out consistently and quickly, provided the devs care enough to address them. I don't have much faith that behavior will start caring about what the community has to say now, but there's always the possibility that they turn over a new leaf and take in criticism intended to help them. And make no mistake, I do want to help them. I love Dead by Daylight and don't want to see it die off in the coming months or years. It's not too late to turn things around and regain positive momentum. For what it's worth, the devs have already done a good job of earning back some of the community's trust. The reworks of Legion, Ghostface, and Haddonfield have gone over extremely well and have almost objectively made DBD a better game. Now that those massive projects are in the past, it would be wise for the devs to put off the planned Twins rework and instead focus on a slew of smaller quality of life changes. After all, reworking the game's least popular killer when there are so many other issues to fix feels like a bit of a luxury patch at a time where life in the fog is anything but luxurious. All of that to say, a couple of quality of life fixes and the game's positive momentum is sure to find its footing. But what about the aforementioned conundrum? The conundrum of how DBD is supposed to be played. In my opinion, this conundrum is why the game has bled players for a year now. At first, I assumed this was because of other issues, but now I've shifted my opinion to the stance that DBD's greatest threat is its own community. Yeah, no crap, I hear you say. But it goes deeper than you might initially believe. Sure, the player base of Dead by Daylight has a habit of being overly dramatic and highly volatile. That said, this particular issue isn't really the fault of the players. It's not the players' faults. that behavior has sent mixed messages as to just what DBD is. Is it competitive? Casual? Some hybrid of the two? Currently, the game exists in this odd limbo between two different styles of play, and it's ruining the experience for players who prefer either side. Competitive players are frustrated and angered by the game's obvious lack of balance, while casual players are tired of facing sweatlords whose only goal in that moment is to dominate the opposition. There is a place, a valid, good place, for both competitive and casual gaming. And yes, some games can balance the two rather well, but Dead by Daylight isn't pulling this balancing act off well at all, and has left the game in a state of general disarray despite numerous positive changes. In many ways, Dead by Daylight is the smoothest running and healthiest it's ever been. Despite this, the community is as unhappy as ever before. Part of this is due to fatigue, sure, but there's little doubt that DBD's two-faced approach to game design is causing untold amount of damage to the game's reputation. Many players have already left, and many more will follow in their footsteps if behavior can't stem the rising tide. But criticism without trying to help figure out what the problem is and how to fix it is generally useless. So, what do I think behavior needs to do? Firstly, they need to pick a side. Either be casual or be competitive, but stop pretending to be both. My personal preference would be that the game lean into the casual, goofy nature of its premise, but even going all in on competitiveness would be better than what we currently have. Next, the game needs to redefine winning, and it needs to do so as soon as possible. Survivor blood points should pool to some extent and reward teams for having the most interactive gameplay possible. A survivor that loops for 3 or 4 plus gens and dies on their first hook shouldn't end up with fewer points than their teammates that held M1 the entire game. A killer that hooks everyone 2 times or more shouldn't be penalized for not getting the same results as, say, a basement Bubba. Redefine winning to reward players that do things, not those that click off superfluous checkboxes. Lastly, if the game is going to become more casual, take the foot off the gas with MMR. I am not saying to remove it entirely. I truly doubt behaviors even seriously considered that. But allow the system some room to breathe. It's okay if my games look a little more like the tracks of a roller coaster than those of a train. Games need variety, or they get stale and fast. Can you imagine if every boss in Elden Ring was roughly the same level of difficulty as one another? Because that's pretty much what the current MMR system has given players to deal with. As I close, I want to reiterate that I love Dead by Daylight. I do. I love this game. I've played for 5 years and would absolutely love to play for 5 more. But I can't do that if the player base drops to too low of a number. And the player base will keep dropping if the devs can't figure out this conundrum. I hope they do. I hope there comes a day when all is well and we can celebrate the best version of Dead by Daylight. And when that day comes, I'll be there, ready to congratulate behavior on their tremendous accomplishment. Most importantly, I hope that day comes soon, that it will come at a time when all of you cuties are still here to celebrate with me. I've been Das Food. Thanks for listening. Bye, friends.
I've been dreaming on in my head like I've seen it. A life worth living is a life with meaning. I'll do what I love till my heart stops beating. I'm feeding this demon. Got a taste, can't erase bitterness in my